The Trump administration's policies around immigration often result in legal disputes. Late last month, federal courts blocked two rules designed to fast-track deportations and detain families with children indefinitely. In the latter ruling, the judge found it would violate the Flores Settlement Agreement that stipulates children must be released after 20 days. It's not the first time presidential administrations have tried to circumvent the agreement, as we discussed with Shefali Milcherik Desai, assistant clinical professor in the U of A College of Law's Immigration Law and Policy program.
So it started in 1985, so just to take everyone back, that's under the administration of President Reagan. And there were a class of plaintiffs who were children who were detained by immigration services in this country. And the plaintiffs' class, the argument that they made was these children are being held in a way that's not safe and sanitary. And furthermore, there isn't the kind of eye towards releasing them. And that lawsuit ultimately got to the U.S. Supreme Court in 1993. Now we're shifting over to the Clinton administration. There were two, and I'm going to kind of talk about them like two buckets, okay? There were two big buckets of things going on in this lawsuit. One bucket was, we don't want children to be in detention for long periods of time. We want to expeditiously process them and release them if at all possible. The second bucket is, to the extent that we need them to be in detention for a certain limited period of time, we want to make sure those conditions are safe, that they're sanitary, and that we're motivated by the concern for the particular vulnerability of children while they're in that situation. The Supreme Court case in 1993 only dealt with a very discrete portion of that first bucket.
This settlement has been challenged in the 30 years of existence by multiple administrations, but somehow it remains in place. How is that legally possible?
So that's the next question in this story. So the case comes back after the Supreme Court to the district court. And in 1997, the parties, at the time the government was the Clinton administration and the plaintiffs, agreed to settle. And that's what becomes the famous Flores Settlement Agreement. And what I want to point out here, because it's something that the district court has said over and over and over again in this case, is that a settlement agreement is essentially a contract. It's a binding contract. And that answers your question as to why this agreement continued.
In light of what's taking place, many leaders in the Department of Homeland Security have classified this as a legal loophole. So it has been challenged. What have been some of the arguments to try and get out of this agreement?
Now let's fast forward to 2015. Now we're under the Obama administration. And the plaintiffs bring an action in court and they say, hey, remember that settlement agreement we entered into? Government, you're not holding up your end of the bargain. In other words, you're in breach of that contract. The response of the government at that time was, look, to the extent that you're talking about accompanied minors, so minors who are in detention with their parents, the agreement doesn't apply to them. So we're not in breach of the agreement. That issue went up to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which in 2016 ruled, consistently with the district court, that there's nothing in the agreement that distinguishes between accompanied minors and unaccompanied minors. So again, going back, putting on your contract hat, the plain language of the statute says it's all minors, and the reasoning for that was, of course, that these agreements were entered into because everyone agreed that children needed certain safety measures in place in order to thrive, in whatever situation they found themselves in. So what the government did after it lost at the district court level in 2017 is they re-triangulated the strategy, and they said, you know what, we're just going to change our regulations. The court's not letting us out of the Flores Settlement Agreement that the government agreed to all those years ago. We're just going to create new rules that say, with respect to accompanied minors, we don't have to do these things. And that's the court ruling that just came down last week from the district court, where the district court said, no, you can't get out of the contract by doing that. And the district court used this very contract-based language that said, for better or for worse, we have the system of contract in our country that gives parties certitude. In other words, if parties didn't believe that their contracts would be honored into perpetuity, they would be reluctant to enter into contracts to begin with. So the court said, I have to honor the plain language of this settlement agreement. It's not a loophole. It's actually a contract which is as old as our nation.